My name is Peter Pilgrim. I'm going to talk to you about contemporary user interface design patterns implemented in JavaFX 2.2. So how many of you are JavaFX developers or have used? If you can raise your hands. Are you beginners? Okay. So at least I know what my standard is. Okay. So I'm Peter Pilgrim. I develop software for a living. I live obviously in London. I normally work for financial services. Right now I am an independent contractor working for various banks and so in the City of London. A Java champion. I've been developing software since in Java, especially since 1998, and since it was called Java 1.1, and then moved from applets to the server side to the EE side, and then kept going with the EE side. But I've always had this fantastic interest in user interfaces, and that comes back from developing before then in games and even Turbo Pascal and doing 3D stuff. Who remembers Turbo Pascal? Anybody? Yes. Who remembers? Yeah. I never could quite afford that Amiga or the Atari ST. So in Britain we had something called the BBC Model B, but the BBC Microcomputer Assembler 6502, and that's my claim to fame. So this is design patterns. I guess you are all software developers. You know about design patterns in terms of software. It's a common means to solve problems, and Christopher Alexandra. So just in case we do have some absolute beginners in the place, design patterns this is the guy who invented the idea of patterns. He had a book called Pattern Language, which was to do with architecture and building, and he came up with some timeless ways of building or architecting. And of course, and in the 90s, we've had the Gang of Four, the famous Gang of Four: Eric Gamma, Richard Helm, Ralph Johnson, and recently, Jonathan. I can't even say his name properly. Does anyone know how to spell his name? I always get it wrong, so I will respect that by letting you read that. So design patterns is the classic idea of object-oriented program, microarchitectures, and the like. And believe it or not, this idea of patterns also is valid for presentations. Someone's written a book about design patterns for presentations, but this is about user interface design. So user interface design also has its notion of visual metaphors, and it's about, I would say, less about rounded corners and getting your application to look like a bookcase it's controversial. Anyway, it's about concrete applications for a start, and your pattern as well has to be valid, of course. It's about products, not processes, and it's not about one single user interface element like a button. It's how you combine these elements together, and the stuff behind the scenes, like accepting events, which goes to make up a visual metaphor or pattern. And just like a singleton in the software context, it does not make, one single pattern does not make your software application. Of course, you get businesses that tell you that they think they're agile and really great because you're using a singleton pattern or iterator pattern. Of course, that does not compute. Does someone have a question? Oh, there was a guy at the back raising his hand. And of course, that doesn't compute. The idea of visual design patterns is, to solve a problem functionally for the user. So I have some design patterns that I implemented in JavaFX 2.2, and they consist of, really an attempt to develop some of these user interface patterns. And I realized now that I'm missing a slide of all the visual patterns, which I will have on my blog when I publish the slides tonight. So there's some of the visual design patterns are like accordion, like saving real estate. I should really describe them. I can't really walk around, but there's things to do with event input, organizing how you lay out your display, organizing how you set and display and visualize data, and so forth. So I've graded these I've graded these JavaFX, these design patterns, and how I've implemented them in JavaFX. If they're moderately easy to implement, that means that you can make the jump. Since many of you raised your hands as JavaFX beginners, you should be able to do this quite easily. And you have the advanced difficulty here, which will take you a bit longer. You need to be able to understand a bit more about the framework in order to solve or implement a design pattern. And then there's ones that are super tough. And the only person who can, well, I could solve them, obviously, then, and there's probably Han Solo. He could solve some of those, or Stephen Chin. So Gerrit could solve those problems. So the first design pattern is a data tip. And a data tip is what you see in Google Finance, which is displaying a lot of graphs, and you have a sort of two tips, and it shows you numerical information that you would like to display or to show to the user. So it's a way of saving real estate, and this is obviously a visual metaphor. So what you must do to complete this pattern, just like you in a singleton, say if someone exposes the constructor as public, then you know it's wrong. The pattern has been wrongly implemented. So in the visual metaphor, you need to be able to show that data, or the data behind the data point that is being displayed. So I can understand that many of you are software engineers. Are there any designers here? Okay, one or two. So I'm being tested. Right. So as software developers, you probably are going to be, or most certainly going to be, working with two people, either the business, who probably don't know exactly what they want in terms of design, but you're the go-to girl or guy that has to implement this in JavaFX. So your data tip is used to show data in graph format, or it could be something else in your imagination, or something like geolocation and a map. And it generally allows the user to quickly pose over or hover over that data point and then show that data. So as you imagine, you save a lot of real estate and reduces the cognitive load and of people who are going to look at this interface that you as JavaFX developers are writing. And if you have a complicated set of data and you want to display that, there's a psychological impact in how much you can process. So if you present it all at once with all the numbers, if your data points contains reams of data, then that may not be the best way to do it. So in JavaFX, Yeah, when I thought about this presentation, I was in two minds how should present it. Should it be technical or design orientated? So this, the actual gist of this presentation should be, from your point of view, as being sympathetic to what you would have to do in order to fulfill one of these design patterns. So for the benefit of the recording, I'll switch to the IDE, the code. And the first one I will run is called data tip demo. So this is an application that displays data of the UK, United Kingdom Met Office, the Meteorological Office weather data. As you can see, this is showing how JavaFX hovers over, you can intercept mouse events over the individual nodes of a chart component. And as I'm hovering, and the mouse event is entering and exiting those nodes, a data tip is being visibly shown, and so therefore it fulfills the design pattern. And a word to the rise here. So what you see around underneath is a line chart. And you could use a pie chart, any sort of data chart in effects. It could even be map data if you are implementing your own component. So it's really straightforward to implement this sort of thing. In JavaFX, you just look at have to understand the event handler and how those things, how to intercept events and listen to events from components. So if I squeeze some of that down, release the demo. The key method to display data is this event handler here, which I'm showing, which is, so for each data point in your XY chart, and you can have pie charts or scatter charts, whatever charts they are. You add an event handler. This is a slightly different method from if you were at the tutorial yesterday. So you can, with add event handler, you can add more than one mouse event. Or you can add a series of events, and JavaFX will call your events in sequence. So from the event handler, you can obviously receive the actual coordinates, as you see here, from the scene graph, and then display a tip. Display your data tip. And the other thing I have implemented is a custom component. And a good tip here for if you are implementing custom components is to always have a demo. It shows. So the demo tip takes a label and a shape. And so with JavaFX, in order to implement that bubble or that speech mark, it's a combination of a rectangle and a polygon. And so you can make another shape by taking one shape, the first shape, and making a union of the second shape, which is really quite useful. So, and therefore you can, although I haven't shown it here, you can create clouds or anything you like. And of course, the animation is activated inside inside the data tip component. So this is just one way of implementing the data tip. So, question?
So you added an event handler to each data point?
Yes. The answer is yes.
Any performance concerns?
No. So no, that's the actual wrong answer that I gave there. So what you do is, yes, I did actually, because I'm confusing two different. So there's no performance concern because each data point is a node in the scene graph. So there's what was your use case? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you. Okay. So, are there any more questions? Okay. So I'll go back to the presentation. So, the next design pattern is straightforward. It shows a data. It's called a data spotlight, and it shows. It's a design pattern to show numerical information, just like the original, the previous one. As the user rolls his mouse or touches a data item, and you also then want to fade out the surrounding elements. So if you have data points, like thousands of them, you may want to get the user to focus on a particular node or point. So this is a design pattern which is then used to reveal obscured information when it's really hard to disambiguate individual sets of graph points and really complicated structures. So, and this is, it provides a affordance, a sort of a way for users to explore that data. So if they have thousands of points, and then in the actual professional application, you can give that user the choice then to display or navigate and understand what is going on with his or her data. So let's go back to the slide, to the code. And I will run this demo. So that's exactly what it does. So as you are hovering over the nodes, not only are you getting a highlight, but the other graphs in the background, the other line charts are actually disappearing. And so there's ways, and there are many more ways. This is a simple example to ease without making it so fancy and so complicated that developers will find it difficult to understand and the code to understand. So I'll make the code also available on my blog. And the way this example works, it's almost the same code behind it, and the code is almost exactly the same. It's that where we have a couple of extra methods here to fade in and out the series of data, the other set of data which is not being hovered over. So for a line chart, the data is organized. I perhaps didn't quite explain this in JavaFX, since you're new to charts. The line chart, it sets a series of data points. So each data point is in a structure called in a class called an xychart.series. You instantiate that, and then you can set a name to it. And as you're iterating or building your data structure from the database, you add your data points one by one. And I've got some various things, and on to convenience functions to do mapping. My actual data points actually, let's see, strings. On the data point is a map collection of strings. So I'm reading the weather data that way, and then converting that to a map collection of string to a number, which is obviously displaying the month, say like April, to the actual temperature. So you have like a map collection. And then once the data tip, I'm using the same class, the data tip class here. Once I've hovered over record, added a change listener to the data point. Where would I have it? Okay, a mouse handler to the data point. Then I can fade out the other series. And then once I have, if I press a mouse button or anywhere else in any other node in the chart, then I fade the other series, all the series of data points back into view. And of course, JavaFX has this notion, all the scene graph nodes have this notion of opacity. So, okay. Back to the presentation. Let's see. Okay, so this is really explains this. This is source code that explains how to fade out, to create a fade transition to all the nodes in the series, and then get it to fade out from 1 to 0. So alternative view, and you've definitely seen alternative view in Google Maps, where you can look at street or satellite or hybrid view, and of course we all know there's a couple of things happening with iOS maps, and you've definitely seen the alternative view in PowerPoint or whatever word processor you like, which gives you the outline view. And so that's really straightforward to implement in JavaFX as well. If you have your data, the only difficulty is when you have a business requirement which requires you to implement a specific type of view. So, which may be an outline view, it might be something more complicated. So I would categorize this design pattern as moderate plus for JavaFX, and sometimes you may come across a situation where you have two business requirements and from two different managers, for example, and you want, hey, how can I solve this issue? And you can give them this idea to, well, perhaps we can have the best of both worlds. I'll implement both your designs and give you both your views, and I'll make a tab pane or a toolbar which shows you view number 1, view number 2. So what I'm going to show you when I switch to the slides is something called a heat map, which I created as an example of an alternative view. Again, using the UK weather data. And as you can see, this view is using the data tip, but in a different way. And you're getting a different view on the right-hand side. So a simple, I don't know, heat map, it could be something completely different, like a graph or a tree, whatever data there is there. And so the heat map is a simple class to show which has a grid of row column rectangles and a function called a spectral color value, an interface that the developer must implement, and it could be anything. So this is the function that you would do for your own data set. So you would provide some mapping function that gives you a different view of the data, but keep the same data as it is read from MongoDB or the database or whatever database you have. So it's generally a mapping exercise, and then mapping that to a view that you probably will design. So if I go back to the presentation. So this is a tougher one, and it's called Movable Panel, and I should have, and so it's about allowing the user to have arranged information in, sorry about that, what happened there? Information, you typically have a portal application or a news aggregator, and you want to give a degree of freedom so that you actually give flexibility to the users. It's a sort of stickability that business managers always say they want. And so you put the content into boxes or viewable frames, and you allow the user to personalize. A very good example of this is obviously portal applications and Google, the iGoogle website, and various other things to customize. So this, I graded this as super tough, because it's really not for beginners. This, you really need to understand a little bit more about JavaFX, how to lay out children, how to lay out components, and it depends also on the type of layout that your business requires. So it's a nice way, it's an easy way to do it, to implement this, which would be to just allow users to drag nodes all over the place and then save the positions. But then if you then want to then constrain users into vertical rows or columns, then a little bit more thought is required and how you implement your layout algorithms. So that's the why of it, and provides the users a degree of power, configurability, and managers and businesses love it because it drives engagement. It's this stickability. So it's a nice to have if somebody implements it for you. But typically, you will have to implement some or customize someone else's code to get exactly what you required for. So drive engagement to the application satisficing. Satisficing is an amalgam of satisfy and sacrificing. So it's basically, what it means is that if you think about it yourself, you want to learn JavaFX, and I just want to do my job, actually. I don't want to know the exact details of how it was created. I don't care if it's created by Christopher Oliver. I just want to get and do my job. So you sacrifice detail in order to satisfy the user. So I'm going to drop straight to. There was one more slide there. I should do things. This is why this is super tough, because it's it implements a region pane. It's a control, and there are 4 subclasses. There's a abstract window frame container. So there's a window frame border class, so you can drag the content around. There's a draggable hint frame border class, and there's an implementation of dragging window frames around, and also animation, the ability to maximize a window and also minimize a window. And so you can already visually see what's going to be implemented, because you've seen this thousands of times before. So let's go straight to the IDE. I almost had it there. Right, behave. Okay. Okay, movable panel. And run. And again, this is something I showed last year. It could be, you can drag components around. So each of these window frames is containing a resizable image component, and you can drag your content around. And it's just enough to fulfill the design pattern. So if I keep dragging and explaining, to fully implement this design pattern would require the ability to close the content and also to resize dynamically. But you can maximize one component, and then you cannot drag it anymore. I'm trying to drag it with the mouse, and so that's being blocked. And then I can minimize that component again. Whoop. And so the animation, as you can see, is happening. And if I try and drag things off, it springs back. Yeah, and so, you can see design patterns are not necessarily about rounded corners or physics or aesthetics. That it only helps. You first have to understand the thing that you're trying to achieve, and does it solve the actual business requirements that the user demands. It's all about the user. If the user wants this, if it helps in how they organize their work, then yeah, we're all winners here. And I graded this as super tough. And the reason is that, although the demo is quite short, let me close all others here. Okay, I've closed them all. Okay, bring it back. This movable panel implementation is quite long. However, compared to developing something like this in Swing, it's a bit easier. It's a lot easier to do that with. So I've broken something here because no longer. Oh, there you go. So you have let's get the structure up, because then it's easier. Again, using visualization, it's easier to see. Okay, so that makes it easier. So look at all the methods. So first thing, you have created a window frame event. So you're allowed to create your own custom events in JavaFX. And so that's that one over there, window frame event. And so I'm going to put the code all up on my blog, so you'll be able to study. So there's 2 sorts of events. One to minimize and one to maximize. So that's the window frame event class. Then I have a frame border. but before, and that is my abstract class. And so it's a nested region class, a type of region, a container. And then I actually then have my window frame border class, which implements the actual frame around my child. And then I have the drop hint frame border, which uses inline styling. Don't do this. Yeah, it's great for demonstrating the design pattern, but if you really want to do it properly, yeah, everyone should prefer to do CSS or JavaFX CSS styles. And so, of course, there's a bug in the CSS I discovered. So I had to specify the text field twice, or the field twice. So I wondered why that wasn't working. So obviously that gave the green and dash border. So the rest of it, you probably don't really need to know. You can study on your own behalf. And so there's a whole heap of event listeners. And I think to write this, you need to write this properly to get started. It would take about 5 days. Probably would take Garrett 3 days. But it took to do the kind of things, 5 days of work, 5 hours a day, and with tea breaks, to get things organized and right. And then there are things that obviously help you finding the drop zone. So as things have been dragged around, you'll find that mouse events have the XY position, the coordinate positions of the node. So you can drag the mouse inside that rectangle or the boundary of the node. But handily enough, you can get where the scene coordinates, which is the coordinates in your scene. And I wish JavaFX allowed a way of getting the coordinates of an arbitrary parent of my node. So if I have a parent and a parent, I wish there was a way of doing it easily. You can do it by computations, and that's probably too much implementation detail. Is there anything? So there's all sorts of things in JavaFX there that to be aware of. For each node can take a bit of user data, but the user can also use that data for itself. Like the developer could, if you're writing a proper library container, you probably don't want to use that. So this is the reason why I created other components such as the window frame border and did some refactoring in classes so I can get different positions. So obviously you've got the row position and column positions of where your component is in your layout. And of course, the obvious implementation of the movable panel is to allow the user to lay out exactly where they want to do. But if you've got a constrained layout system and there can't be any overlapping of components, then you need to come up with an algorithm depending on your business requirements. You can always tell your manager, I just don't know how to do that. And but I don't think they'd be quite happy. This is exactly how it should operate, and you should do this. And okay. So a couple more things. For each, if you've done any user interface development, you probably want to know what's the width and height of my child. So JavaFX has a method called layout children, And what before a layout post or a layout call is pushed through from the SDK, it will you can tell the parent who's asking you what size you want to be, what your preferred size is. So if you're being managed by yourself, then you owe it to do this calculations so that you can play nicely in the JavaFX world. And that's the same thing in Windows or any other user interface graphics kit. And so JavaFX has a couple of methods that are very useful to implement. Compute preferred height and compute preferred width. And so I'm storing values in the cache, because what happens sometimes in JavaFX, you get a lot of request layout events because things are being moved around or something's been animated. So you don't want to keep asking the same children. If they never change size, just store that information. Okay, so that is why I call it implementation tough. It requires a bit more knowledge of JavaFX, a bit more experience, but you can do it. And so you can learn by just looking at the code. And yeah, I'm happy to answer questions. Okay, so that was the most... that was the toughest one. Let me check some time. Okay, so I will finish this up quickly. Okay, so the next one I call is broadcast media. Well, national broadcast media. And it obviously allows people to... This is a design pattern that everybody knows. It's you push a button and you play video or audio. And there's thousands of these things on the internet for Flash. And there is a Dutch guy, I can't remember his name, J.W. Guerin or something like that. He's made a fortune selling his Flash player, which is why I've said that this is advanced. Conceptually, if you go to the JavaFX website, download the ensemble, there's a media player in there, and the code is short. But then there are things that your customers may want or you may want. So the media player is obviously to display a title, the duration of your media player, and then optionally if you want to scrub or allow the user to control the timeline, then things can get sticky there, or as in. So so as I said in the slide, the business, they suddenly want a media play. Thankfully, JavaFX plays great media, H.264, FLV, MP4, MPEG-4s, and you may have a sudden requirement. Suddenly, I need to provide some journalistic function, and then you may have a business where, well, the users are more visual. You're taking care of that of a psychological side of the user's user experience. So they like looking at information rather than reading reams of documentation. Okay, so I've called this the National Media Player because the standard things, thankfully, that the JavaFX team have provided. So they already provide a media class, which contains your media, a media view, which is the view, it's the scene graph node, and the media player, which is the thing that plays the media player. So, and then there's how then do you implement this? What kind of media player do you... You can have endless arguments. No, should there be a stop button? No, if it's just pausing, what do I do? What should we do? And then what kind of slide control? Do you want dual slider, single slider? and how things should fade in and out. So this is the final implementation, and obviously, and I'll switch to the IDE. So I'm not going to touch the button here. So that's gone. So as I'm moving the mouse over and over that player, the controls fall away. And again, this is incomplete because when you look at that, what is it? So maybe there's a design discussion to say maybe we should have an arrow or some kind of reference, a hint that there's a media player here. So maybe it should fade in and out. So again, it's not about rounded corners. It's about giving that user the information he needs to complete their job, which is obviously here watching content. But it could be market trade data for a trader. If the trader suddenly opens the screen and he just says a blank and doesn't have the visual hint, then what does he do? He's missed his stock, or he goes to some other competitor. So it's a little subtle mistake in implementation can make a great deal. So as I move the mouse over, obviously this is an implementation of a national broadcast player sort that is available in the UK, and it looks sort of like their player. So my dual state buttons function as when the background color changes. So this dual state button is actually two images which I created in Photoshop, and the background was transparent, and it's a simple triangle, and I stroked if you've used Photoshop. Anybody use Photoshop here? A bit, yeah. So you already know then how to implement some of the images. And again, I should just play it. So rather than describe it. So this is James Gosling at the Silicon Valley Roundup in 2010. So this is JavaFX. This is what it's all about. This is why I am pleased. I'm digressing here. That why I've lost the play. Yes, it's back. Why I'm pleased. It's going to be part of why it is part of the JDK from 7 Up. And well, so to a few things here in the implementation. There are a couple of classes. So if you keep the mouse button in the bottom region, then the transition never happens. And again, this is a design discussion. This is why I call it from advanced to super tough, because you can go round and round in circles. So can anyone see things that are missing in this media player? There's no volume control, for instance. There's no maximize, yes. The maximize is there. It's strange. It definitely works when it's in non-projector mode and it can play.
Plotting sort of thing. The question is about, multi-core. What can we do about it? What's the right thing to do with Java?
And then you can do that. Get it. XC. The media, well, that's the design question. How far do you go? Because there's thousands of things, lots of skins on the internet. is then you start with a simple media player, and then you add that dynamic content. And what happens if you're streaming and stuff? And of course it works.
And that's
I'll turn the voice
really
down.
fascinating issue.
So out of full screen, it's no problem at all. And of course, I just love the scrubbing. The only thing that's missing for those who love video editors and Premiere Elements is the scrubbing noise, where you could really go, that sort of thing. That'd be fantastic. Then the job will be complete. So I'll get out of that and talk you through some code. Let me get rid of the structure. So at the moment, it's quite simple there. There's a time shift. Let me fire up the time shift demo, because that is a skinnable component. So this is a time shift demo. So this is, I could have implemented this in using the slider control, but I wanted my own look and feel there. So this is also a design decision, whether the actual control is sufficient for you in JavaFX, or you can take something from JavaFX extras and customize it. Question? No? Oh, okay. And then there are, okay, I don't. So there's, in this class package, there's the broadcast player, there's the demo, the dual state button is simply taking two images and just displaying it on an off state. There's the time shift control. And this is not long at all. The actual broadcast player is not long at all. It's just 500 lines of code. And the demo code is generally that. And the actual player exposes a property for full screen. You just throw a listener on it, and you work out how big your screen is. This is one way to do it. There's another way to do it, which is to throw up a new stage and then move your component, unparent it, make it an orphan temporarily, and then move it to the new stage. And then once you've detected a close events on your stage above, move that parent and reparent it. These are all ways and means. So generally, I will go back to the presentation and finish up this. So let's go. So implementation details, what to look out for. So as I said before, prefer the SDK methods. They really are your friends to lay out components, especially if you're implementing custom components. So in region, which is the most common parent, or the most, there is a layout in area and position in area. I tend to use the methods in Node that every node has, but sometimes doesn't obey. Not every node in JavaFX is resizable, but every node is relocatable, so you can position things even if they're not resizable in JavaFX. Understand JavaFX events. Event handlers are the handlers that actually consume events in the way effects of events works. They bubble down rather to the node that is the furthest away from the event source. Event filters are handlers that can intercept and decide to either consume an event. So that might be useful to prevent events traveling to a node, especially if it's under animation. So, and if you're dragging nodes, as in the nodes around, prefer to move the nodes through translation. And once the translation is done, you can capture the translation coordinates and then put them into layout coordinates. So it's a bit of learning to do. So JavaFX nodes have two different coordinate systems. There's the coordinate system of in translations, which is the position, and there's also another coordinate system for layouts, and the two of them combined. So you, what that means is that if you translate a node and keep the layout the same, then you can get a bouncing ball. But if you layout is specifically for the laying out of coordinates. So what's guaranteed with layout coordinates, you can always position a node at a certain point if it has 0 translations. So was there a question? No. Okay. Going forward now, if you can implement controls, your custom controls as controls, you can use regen for containers, as I have shown here. The reason why you probably would like to use a control is that controls are stylable, and they have this style class. That means you can use the CSS. And if you're writing end-user applications that are skinnable, you definitely want to write a control. So, and this presentation has been inspired by user interface designers. One of them is Joe Nuxoll, of the Java Posse. He used to be a software designer, but he's now a user interface designer. He works exclusively in Photoshop and Illustrator, and he works for Tesla Motors, actually. And the book for user interface design patterns is by Jennifer Tidwell, Designing Interfaces, and there's a humongous set of design patterns in her book. And there's a slightly older one, which is a red book, which is The Design of Sites, which is specifically for websites. Jennifer's has mobile and design patterns. She talks about social networking and things like sharing and as well as the accordion and fat borders and things like that. So coming from the web and design world, it's a fascinating world that I see on the side. So I'm a software developer by heart, but if you are working with user interface guys, then it's a world that you have to explore as well. And so, yeah, get to know user interface design patterns. It's knowing how to do things and understanding what they are, why they are, and then how. Because obviously you are the how guys and girls. And what's missing is the what and why. And then if you know the other two questions, then you can interact with the designer and give some feedback and say, oh, right, we can work together then. So that's the end of the presentation, and thank you. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Yes?
Any of the code you showed today is available at the FX Extras site?
No, I haven't. Yeah, oh, thank you very much. So the question was, have I contributed any code? Yeah, I probably can. I'm thinking of giving it as educational stuff to put in GitHub. So, yeah, my problem is therefore process. Because I develop privately, then I tend to use my own version control system. And then I come to events like this, and then it has to go public. So I probably will push it to GitHub. As I said, the code is unfinished. And JavaFX Extras is meant for guys and girls like you, to develop with in professional applications. So that's the end. Oops. Any more questions?
Not directly related to your presentation, but I noticed you used an IntelliJ.
Yeah.
I was just wondering how is that for doing JavaFX work?
I think it's really good. I'm an Eclipse user, for my day job, it's Eclipse and Spring Tool Suite, and IntelliJ seems to work. I'm a new guy for IntelliJ, and I find it the best IDE for Scala at the moment, and yeah, it works with Groovy quite well. It's a JavaFX. The code completion is really good. Yeah.
I see, as I'm watching this, I'm wondering one thing. I use Google Web Toolkit a lot.
Yeah.
Almost everything you've done up there, except maybe the audio and the video, because I've never played with that, I don't know.
Yeah.
I can do within that. What is the advantage of using FX in Google Web Toolkit?
Well, the advantage, what is the advantage of using Google Web Toolkit? Yes, it's over the web. Then if you have a desktop application, and that's the requirement, then you can use JavaFX for that. If you it's back to the business. So really, if they want that application for performance, everybody knows the JVM runs shockingly fast, and Java is running there. I don't see the problem. However, if your end user is limited, they can only execute web applications, then GWT or some other framework that is a web framework is the one for you. Yeah.
So it's actually more about the user requirement than it is the one technology is better.
Yeah, it ultimately comes down to that.